Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for the debut of a brand new gameplay series here on the channel. This was meant to go live on Tuesday, but unfortunately due to technical difficulties, the export and rendering of this video wasn't finished until this fine Wednesday evening, so the series is debuting on a Wednesday, despite the fact that the series is going to be coming out every single Tuesday from now on, so every single week we have these new episodes guaranteed. Is going to break up the schedule a bit more so that now we have something guaranteed for the start of the week as these episodes coming out every single Tuesday. But enough about the schedule of this series, let's talk about the rules and regulations behind it. So we all know how a lock works, and for the Sensei ones in particular I have a brand new batch of rules. So whenever an element pops up I must switch out to a Skylander corresponding to that element, and I cannot switch out again until the element of the area changes once more. Then if a Skylander is defeated in combat, the class is dead and cannot be used again throughout the remainder of the lock. When a doomlander pops up, I must switch out to the corresponding character of its battle class. So a Smasher character has to fight against the Smasher doomlander, and trust me, that's a tough fight given that that fight is set in 2D, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. There's one final rule, and given that only senseis are going to be involved in this series, every single time they have to complete the Battle Gong. So those are the four base rules right now: elemental switching, doomlander switching, obviously for classic, if they're defeated they're done so and cannot be used again, and the final one being for Battle Gong. So we all know how a lock works, but how exactly is this series taking a lock and twisting it in a completely unique fashion? I call it the Skylanders Imaginators Versus series at the end of the day, not the Skylanders Imaginators Lock. Well, a Versus is two locks essentially being pitted together to find out which cast of characters is the better cast. And this is based on three categories. Since it's a best of three, there can only be one winner. The first category is the survivors category, so whichever cast has the most remaining undefeated characters at the end of the lock. The second category is the speedrunner category. Whichever team gets through and beats the game the quickest wins the speedrunner category. Then the final category, what is essentially the tiebreaker category, since we're playing in Skylanders Imaginators, it's the number of Imaginite pieces collected, not the amount of Imaginite chests, the amount of Imaginite pieces, and that is to even out the speedrunning objective a little bit, because if you're unlocking more Imaginite chunks, if you're completing sets, that is taking up time, which is going to add to your timer, and it's not going to add to the opposing timer. It's going to be an unfair disadvantage. It's going to only be several seconds, but those seconds will add up if unchecked. So to balance things out, if you complete a set, that's obviously an extra piece of Imaginite that you've collected, and that goes the same for whenever you're opening a chest that has multiple parts in it, like when you defeat a doomlander you get chests with multiple parts in them. So that is essentially a versus lock. We're pitting two locks together, and it's essentially became a science experiment to see which cast of characters is the better cast of characters. And every good science experiment has a set of dependent variables, independent variables, and control variables. The control variables are what keeps things fair because they are what remains the same. So in this case, we're playing both locks on the PlayStation 4. Obviously, I'm not playing both locks simultaneously because I don't have 4 arms and 2 televisions to do that. So they're both being played on the PlayStation 4 in order for the loading screens and the cutscenes to take the same amount of time. You'll see after we've synchronized everything up on the setup just how similar and synchronized they are when playing on the same console. Obviously, if one of them was played on PlayStation 4 and the other the Xbox 360, the Xbox 360 is going to have longer loading screens, so it's not going to be synced up. The time is naturally going to be longer for the Xbox 360 based on loading screens and cutscenes alone, and that wouldn't be fair, which is why the console we're playing on is a control variable. And then there's also the player. The player is me in both instances, and my skill level is going to be the same no matter what. I'm not playing favorites here, I'm just trying to play each cast as best as I possibly can, and since I'm the same player and I have the same skill level throughout, that variable can be easily controlled, which leads to the independent variable, the thing that you change, which is the cast of characters. So naturally, despite me being the same skill level as I play with each cast of characters, if one cast of characters is just naturally better than the others, they are going to do better with essentially that same skill level behind them. Some independent variables are the characters, that's what we change. Leading to dependent variables, these are what change based upon the independent variables and the control variables, keeping things fair so the experiment can actually work. Now, because we're changing up the characters, that means that how quickly the block is completed and how many characters are still defeated at the end is for dependent variables. Those are what the entire experiment depends upon changing in order for a point to be proven. The point being, which cast is better? Is it the senseis or the villains? Which leads us on to our final point of call, so to say, before we roll the intro and get straight into this series, because we have to talk about the cast still. Now, for the cast, I have one sensei of every element, and one sensei of every battle class, so that then we can fight every doomlander with the corresponding battle class character, and then we have every element in order to represent whenever an element of the area pops up. However, there is one exception to this rule, because we have legendary tri-tip as a light smasher. I've chosen legendary tri-tip because that means the cast can be incredibly varied from the regular cast I do for the sensei locks, because I did do a sensei lock live a while back with a cast that's completely different to the one I've utilised this time around. This time around we have characters like Chain Reaction, who's even way back now. So Chain Reaction is involved, and legendary tri-tip is representing the light element. Rather than regular tri-tip, I've made it legendary tri-tip because that way him being a variant kind of makes him stand out as an oddball, and it makes it brutally obvious that he is not the traditional Earth character we came to know and love. So whenever the light element pops up, legendary tri-tip shall be utilised instead, but his battle class remains the same, so he will be a smasher fighting against a smasher doomlander. So whether or not he even makes it past Golden Arcade is going to be an interesting thing to watch unfold before us. And then the villain cast is just all 10 of the villains, because they all naturally fall into 10 different elements and 10 different battle classes. So those are our two casts. I'm doing a lock, and they're essentially being pitted together to find out which cast of characters is the most efficient in a lock type format. I'm looking forward to this science experiment. It's going to be a 12-part series. Obviously 10 episodes dedicated to each of the levels, then we're going to have one intermission with the cake missions, and then the finale is going to feature the final chaos boss fight, as well as a complete analytical breakdown of the series, if I can say that correctly. That is, stuttering is a natural part of the Igknight formula after all. Not only that, we're going to have an award show for the final episode of the series as well, and it's going to be an award show determined by all of you. So I'm going to create a bunch of different categories, and I'm going to have all of the viewers interact with comments below and choose the winners of each category. Those categories are going to be announced later in the series, so definitely be sure to stay tuned because we have lots of exciting stuff coming up. Obviously I can't have the audio for each playthrough playing, because then they overlap and it sounds horrendous, which is why I'm going to just cut all game audio altogether, and I'm simply going to post commentate and add music into the background like you can hear already. But this intro is almost 10 minutes long, so I think it's about time we rolled that intro and got straight into it without further ado. Okay, so expert difficulty has been selected for both of the teams here, and now all we've got to do is wait for the cutscene to begin, because that is exactly when both of their timers will start. And as you can tell, the gameplay is synchronized up to make sure that these teams are as fairly even out as what could possibly be comprehended. And cutscenes, loading screens, all of those are very quick on PlayStation 4. Fortunate for me, because 20 seconds in and we're already almost into the gameplay here. But unfortunately, the villains are going to take a disadvantage right at the start there, because Graveclubber, when you summon him in, he has a couple of frames of vulnerability where he's a bit too busy kind of presenting himself for the camera. So because of those frames, Graveclubber's already lacking behind, and it doesn't help that Graveclubber's naturally slower than Tidepool. But you've got to be careful of those vulnerability frames, because on Nightmare mode, if you summon Graveclubber into a precarious situation during those vulnerability frames, he's going to be hit 2 or 3 times, and on Nightmare mode that would be more than half of Graveclubber's health bar. But speaking of which, he continues to lag behind, only just now as he entering into the cave, as Tidepool picks up the first Imaginite chunk for her team, those being the Senseis. She's grabbing the key and already heading out the cave, whilst Graveclubber finally makes his way to that Imaginite chunk we was talking about earlier. So far, the Imaginite is 1-1, which means that the tiebreaker situation is going to just result in the need for another tiebreaker. But that's obviously going to change as we continue to collect more and more Imaginite chests throughout this series. Now, Graveclubber is only just making his way to the orb as Typal has already broken through it, and she is about to perform a very clever maneuver right here. So she's taken out all the enemies and she's pushed the ball, but it's slowly but surely making its way into the hole. So she, in anticipation for it, has already made her way towards the bottom of the bridge, which means that now, once the bridge has opened itself up, she can immediately get to crossing it. And now Graveclubber has finally put the ball into the hole, so he just has the alligator or crocodile bridge, whatever you want to call it. He's only just got it summoned for him, so now he needs to make his way to the Brawler Shrine, of which both of these teams are going to be taking advantage of that Brawler Shrine, because by doing so they garner new Imaginite pieces, which is going to add to their Imaginite parts counter. They need that to be as high as possible in the event of a tiebreaker, but due to the fact that Airstrike is not of the water element, he had to be summoned in after Tidal, so that summoning in motion has evened things out, because Graveclubber was both a water and a brawler, so he could go straight into the shrine and access it immediately. But you might think that evened things out. Airstrike is currently obliterating everything. He is a character made for speedrunning, and so Graveclubber being the exact opposite of that, he's really starting to lag behind, so the villains are really going to need to pick up the pace in later episodes to catch up with Senseis, especially if they're already going to be ending off this episode with a deficit where the counter will end as soon as we exit the academy with the final cutscene there. Now, Graveclubber has finally made his way into the maze, whilst Airstrike has only gotten he's already halfway through it. That was where he was midway through my sentence, but now he's finished the maze. It's just that quick that he finishes it before I even have a chance to finish my own damn sentence. So here we go for Battle Gong, as I stated in the rules at the beginning of this video. Since this is a dual Sensei Locke, these Battle Gongs are mandatory. There is no other choice about it. But on the bright side, you do get Imaginite pieces for completing them. You just got to hope that we don't lose any of these characters to the Gongs, because that would be a really tragic way to go. But now Graveclubber is already in, obliterating everything. But Airstrike is almost already done with his, and he's decided to stand as he finishes the Battle Gong exactly where the Imaginite chest will spawn, so that then he doesn't need to run to it, only to run back and begin collecting more Imaginite chests from the free paths. And Graveclubber has had the same idea, moving over to where the Imaginite chest was spawned in, so he doesn't have to run back and forth much like Airstrike did. And now he's finally making his way to the first room, even though Airstrike has completed it already. Man, is he already just that far ahead. Now it's time for the second path, which is revolving around platforming. That's for Airstrike, but luckily for the Senseis, Airstrike is a very competent platformer. In fact, you're going to see that unfold before you with some very impressive jumps right now. It's a miracle that Airstrike managed to make that jump, and it saved him several seconds which Graveclubber seems to still be losing on behalf of the villain. So even with one less summon in this episode, the Senseis are still absolutely running away with it. And I doubt anyone's going to be defeated in combat, because that would be embarrassing, being defeated in combat on the very first level, mind you. Now Airstrike has made his way over to the flying platforms, but he just barely misses out on that second one there, so that's going to put a hindrance on his timer ever so slightly. But now he has that third and final Imaginite chunk, and Graveclubber is just slowly but surely making his way to that final chest. He's hit the bounce pad, but not with the most efficient path work, mind you. He did miss that pad at first, and by punching and honing in onto that enemy, Graveclubber almost missed the platform going up. So if he had to wait down there for the platform to come back down again and create an even bigger time deficit for the villains, that wouldn't have reflected good in his character. He's got to perform well if he wants that MVP award on behalf of his team. But now Airstrike is already summoning for bridge, whereas Graveclubber has only just spawned for bounce pad in order to get up top, so he has enemies to defeat before he can even summon that very same bridge, where Airstrike is already just that far ahead. He has the maneuvering platforms to get around, and let's not forget the snail challenges, another thing which is highly recommended. Much like for shrines, it is not mandatory, unlike the Battle Gongs, but It is recommended to do these snail challenges because, just like for shrines, mind you, they give you Imaginite chests, which is precisely what these teams are going to need in the event of a tiebreaker. The more cumulative Imaginite parts they have, the better they will fare. Now, Gravelobber has finally made his way to those maneuvering platforms as Airstrike summons the bridge, so the Senseis are going to be beginning the Sorcerer Doomlander boss fight much sooner than the villains it's looking like thus far. But the villains are definitely going to hold out a lot more hope when it comes to their pure survival. Given how overpowered the villains are, it wouldn't surprise me if more of them survive to the end compared to the Senseis, which means that the Senseis really need that speedrun encounter in order to stand a chance. And in the end, it will probably wind up coming down to a tiebreaker, but that's what makes collecting all of these Imaginite parts that much more exciting and that much more mandatory than in the base game itself, I suppose. I mean, sure, you get a few Imaginite parts to create your own Imaginators in the game. That's cool. Not nearly as cool as acting as a tiebreaker in this highly competitive situation. But now both of the teams have finally made their way to the Doomlander, though Pit Boss is already on the second phase, and now Golden Queen has only just found herself having been summoned in. But luckily for Golden Queen, she is an absolute unit and will be able to take down this boss, even at a level deficit, because she hasn't been ranked up to level 20 just yet. But at the bare minimum, she has all her upgrades to ensure that her power level can hold a candle to that of Pit Boss. Therefore, things are still perfectly even, because these villains, they certainly are being a lot more efficient in combat. They're getting hit much less and they're defeating enemies a lot more quickly than the Senseis, but the Senseis just generally have more speed to them, with only the exceptions being characters like Blastertron for the villains, who are a little quicker than usual, Wolfgang as well, I suppose. But then the Senseis have characters like Airstrike, as we've seen already, he's an absolute speedrunning demon, and Flarewolf is no different, for example. But here we go with both of these characters finally have made it to the final phase of their Doomlander fights. Well, Golden Queen did it just now, I said that in anticipation for her getting there, but Pit Boss has actually defeated the Sorcerer Doomlander already. It's not the most difficult fight to have to deal with, so as per the norm, I'm mashing that skip button as fast as possible in order to ensure that the Senseis don't lose time waiting for these cutscenes to play out, because that would be a truly tragic way to lose time now, wouldn't it? So Golden Queen is just continuing to finish off the enemies as Pit Boss's team get towards the triple stars, or should I say just for one, because I didn't realise when filming through these first few levels that collecting all the collectibles would be a good idea. Obviously level stars grant Imaginite chests, but I wasn't thinking about that in this first level for either playthrough with each of the teams, so naturally I missed those collectibles, trying to save as much time as possible. But for the future episodes, we will bear it in mind that we get Imaginite chests as a reward for level stars, so we will be collecting collectibles in most of the levels in order to garner access to said level stars. But now we have the Academy, for Sensei is going to get straight into it. Meanwhile, for villains are only just loading into the MAP for Mysterious Ancient Place, because they just really had to incorporate the word map into an acronym of sorts. But just like for Senseis, the villains are going to get the fire round discovered and get that cutscene out of the way as fast as possible, because that could waste time future in the run. Best to get it sorted now before all else. So when it comes to the Academy, luckily when it comes to the fight between Golden Queen and Pit Boss in terms of their raw speed, they are fairly even matched. So Golden Queen is actually going to visit the Imaginite chest and get the Imaginite for the level star and the shrine that they accessed. It was in that moment, after having unlocked that level star chest, that I realised that if we unlock more level stars per level, then we can get more Imaginite chests respectively for each team, which is why in future we are going to be trying to acquire as many of those level stars as possible. But finally, after having wasted time opening up those chests, Golden Queen has made her way to the Academy, and she has quite a lot of catching up with Pit Boss to do as he makes his way towards that switch right there. And now he's going to make it up, but by the time he makes it up, I'm not sure if he's going to make it for the loop of the moving platform. You can't exactly get to the other side without it. But Golden Queen here also has a lock puzzle to complete, one which Pit Boss did what feels like a millennium ago. But no, never mind, I suppose my calculations were incorrect, because Pit Boss did in fact make it to that moving platform with great haste. you know, he's already going through it with more efficiency and speed than Golden Queen could hope to beat. Here she is with only the first switch, and she didn't even make that jump either. Like Graveclobber, her lines right there had a little bit more to be desired. She needs to be a lot more direct with her routes, even though these are microseconds we're talking about here. But who knows, in the end, microseconds could be what makes the difference for the speedrunning category. Obviously, survival also counts, but in the event of a tiebreaker, as I've mentioned already, it's going to come down to Imaginite parts, whoever collected the most. Now, Pit Boss is already on the second puzzle, and you want to make sure you unify all of these gems because they also grant an Imaginite chest, something which you want in order to add to that Imaginite counter. Now, Golden Queen missed the loop of the moving platform and had to wait for it to come all the way back. So right when you thought that they didn't have enough seconds, they had lost already compared to the Senseis, they went on ahead and lost even more time due to the bad luck Golden Queen went through right now. I suppose Pit Boss might have a little bit more base speed than what Golden Queen possesses. But for villains, let me remind you once again, they are way more efficient in combat. They are seriously overpowered. In fact, if we lose any of the villains in this lock, I will be surprised. So Golden Queen is out there collecting all of the chunks and garnering yet another Imaginite chest, the same as what Pit Boss did. And Pit Boss has taken a legendary selfie there on the left. We're just past the 12-minute marker as Golden Queen goes for the second Imaginite puzzle thing with Bob. We're going to stick with that because that's descriptive enough as is. And Golden Queen seems to be having a much harder time with this puzzle than Pit Boss. It would seem as though whichever chunk I record first is at a disadvantage because I'm not as prepared and as familiar with the run as I am for the second time around, which is why in every episode, when it comes to the recording of said episode, we're going to take it in turns for the team as to which run is done first. So this time the villain run was done first. For the next episode, the Sensei run will be done first. That's the most fair way of evening things out, if you were to ask me. But now we have a bunch of bucks flying into place for Golden Queen's team. She's slowly but surely making her way to that legendary selfie spot so that then she can take a selfie even better than that of Pit Boss, because his selfie kind of sucked. You know, his face wasn't involved in it, though the utilization of the word suck with the S is appropriate given Pit Boss's snaking capabilities. But just like that, the villain timer has concluded, or the Sensei timer I should say even. The Sensei timer is concluded at 13:24 because the cutscene had came to an end at that marker. And so in the next episode, the countdown will continue, or the timer will continue as soon as the characters leave their spot in the academy. But really all we have left on the left screen now is a freeze frame of the final chunk of the Sensei gameplay. The villains need to finish and catch up with them, and already they're almost a minute behind as Golden Queen speaks with Persephone. And here I forget to mash the circle button, unlike I did with Pit Boss, because I recorded for villains first and didn't realise that I could have mashed the circle to get out of the upgrade chamber as quickly as possible. There was that, and I also wanted to take a couple of seconds, have a couple of frames there to prove that Golden Queen's upgrade chamber had indeed been completed, making the Sorcerer Doomlander fight as fair as it possibly could have been. But now we're back at the academy, we've just got to wait for this cutscene to finish, and just like that, the villain's timer concludes, and we have our first episode of this series coming to an end. Okay, so my face is back. Don't expect this episode breakdown at the end of each episode. I just felt as though it would be fitting to have my face at the end of this episode, given that my face was at the start of this episode also. It's a great way to draw for full circle, having my face at the end just as I did at the beginning. Regardless, the Senseis in this episode didn't open their chests, so at the beginning of the next episode, the villains will have an advantage because they'll have less chests to open than the Senseis, saving them a couple of seconds so they can get into the level Mushroom River much sooner. Now you'll notice that the villains were a little rusty in this run, and that's because it was my first time through Cradle of Creation, and then I recorded the Sensei's run of that level directly afterwards. So the Senseis, I was a little bit more familiar and prepped for the level than I was with the villains. So to make it fair, I'm going to alternate which team does the first run every episode. So in the next episode, the Senseis will have the first run, so then when the villains go into it and I record that run directly afterwards, the villains are going to be a lot more familiar, and as such I'm going to be able to get through the level a lot more quickly with things right at the top of my mind. But that being said and done, that's how the series is going to be working. We're going to be alternating which run of the level I record first with which team. And now it's time for the outro, because I'm really pumped for Mushroom River and to see where the series goes further. The villains are currently more than a minute behind, so will they catch up in the next episode is a question to be asked. I cannot, in good conscience, end off this video without first thanking all of my incredible channel members whose continued support help make these videos possible. Without them, these videos would be near impossible to make, so from the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate every last one of them. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, there are plenty of options on screen now to explore, and please consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. On that note, this video is coming to an end, so thank you so much as always for watching. Until the next video arises, peace!